The Mary Celeste. In December 1872, the British brig de Gratia spotted a vessel drifting aimlessly about 400 miles east of the Azores. The ship was the Mary Celeste, an American merchant brigantine that had set sail just a month earlier from New York, bound for Genoa. Her sails were partially set, her cargo of industrial alcohol was untouched, and her hull remained unscathed. But there was not a single soul aboard. The ship was completely deserted. The lifeboat was missing. The food in the galley was still laid out. Pipes and cups sat undisturbed on the table. There were no signs of struggle, damage, or distress. No blood, no water damage, just silence. What happened to the crew of 10, including the captain's wife and daughter, remains one of maritime history's most unsettling enigmas. The Mary Celeste was found in seaworthy condition. Her cargo of 1,701 barrels remained nearly untouched, save for a few empty casks. The ship's logbook, last signed 10 days earlier, mentioned nothing abnormal. Navigation tools and the ship's chronometer were missing, along with the only lifeboat. Yet the crew had left behind their oilskins, valuables, and personal items. Even the ship's pumps and cargo hold showed no indication of critical failure. The food supplies were intact, enough to last 6 months, and the water barrels remained full. It looked as if the crew had simply walked off the ship in the middle of a meal. Initial suspicions of piracy were quickly ruled out. The cargo was intact, no valuables were stolen, there were no signs of violence. Theories spread, a sudden water spout, alcohol fumes causing panic, or even a seaquake. But none of these explained why trained sailors would abandon a perfectly sound ship in calm weather. No trace of the crew was ever found, not a body, not a scrap of clothing. The sea had swallowed them without leaving a clue. The U.S. and British navies investigated the case, but their reports were inconclusive. Over time, the ship gained infamy as a ghost ship. Newspapers speculated wildly, inventing tales of mutiny, sea monsters, and spectral apparitions. But behind the legends remained cold, empty facts. A ship left intact, a crew erased. The mystery of the Mary Celeste was so unnerving that decades later, author Arthur Conan Doyle would fictionalize the story, further embedding it into the mythos of unsolved maritime disappearances. Modern reevaluations still find no satisfying answer. Some researchers point to a faulty alcohol barrel leaking vapors that could have spooked the crew into temporarily abandoning ship. But why take only one lifeboat? Why not return? Why leave behind essential navigation tools? If the Mary Celeste was a stage, then its final act was left without actors. The set remains intact, but the players are gone. No last words, no signal, no footprints. Just a perfectly preserved silence floating across the Atlantic. The MV Joyita. On October 25, 1955, the MV Joyita, a 69-foot merchant vessel, was scheduled to make a routine journey between Samoa and the Tokelau Islands. On board were 25 passengers and crew. The weather was calm. The trip was expected to last 2 days, but the Joyita never arrived. 5 weeks later, a passing ship discovered her drifting more than 600 miles off course, partially submerged and listing heavily. No one was on board. Every person had vanished. And what was left behind told a story even stranger than the disappearance itself. The Joyita was in poor condition when found. She was filled with water up to the lower decks, though she remained afloat due to her cork-lined hull. But her radio had been tuned to the international distress frequency. The antenna, however, had been torn down, making it impossible to send messages. Blood-stained bandages were discovered in a medical kit on deck. The navigation log, sextant, and firearms were missing. Most disturbing of all, 4 tons of cargo, food, medical supplies, and trade goods had also disappeared. Investigators were baffled. If the Joyita had taken on water early in the journey, why abandon ship when she was still seaworthy? The vessel had been known to list due to a faulty bilge pump, but the crew would have known she couldn't sink. Why then remove the lifeboats, yet leave behind provisions and personal items? A captain with decades of experience had been in charge. His orders should have been clear. Yet the silence from the Joyita was total. Further examination revealed that the ship's wiring had been patched together dangerously. A corroded pipe had likely caused the flooding. But that still didn't explain the panic. The lack of distress calls, the disappearance of essential navigational gear, and the absence of a single body pointed towards something more than mechanical failure. Whispers began to spread in the Pacific maritime community. Some believed there had been a mutiny. Others blamed piracy, though nothing indicated theft. A few speculated about Cold War espionage, citing rumors that the vessel might have been carrying secret cargo. The blood-stained bandages fueled darker theories, from internal violence to an unreported attack. But no evidence ever surfaced. The survivors were never found. There were no witnesses. The families were left in a void of unanswered questions. The Joyita was repaired and returned to service, but her reputation as a cursed ship remained. To this day, the case remains one of Oceania's greatest maritime mysteries. A ship that should have made a simple journey ended up abandoned in the vast Pacific. Not a single passenger, not a single crewman ever came home. Only the ghost of a voyage remained, drifting alone in open water. The Kaz II. On April 18, 2007, a sleek white catamaran named Kaz II was discovered adrift off the coast of Queensland, Australia. Her engines were idling, her sails were up, though some were shredded by the wind. A laptop sat open on a table, and a meal was still laid out in the galley. Everything looked normal until authorities boarded the vessel and realized that the three-man crew had vanished. There was no sign of struggle, no signs of foul play, and no explanation for their disappearance. It was as if they had stepped off the boat mid-conversation and melted into the sea. The Kaz II had left the port of Airlie Beach just 3 days prior, bound north along the Australian coast. On board were 3 experienced sailors, Derek Batten, Peter Tunstead, and James Tunstead. Conditions had been calm, the weather was stable, the route was familiar, but the last radio contact came just a few hours after departure. Then, complete silence. When the boat was found, about 100 miles from its departure point, investigators were stunned. The dining area was neat. The crew's belongings, including wallets and mobile phones, were undisturbed. The life jackets were still in their storage compartments. The emergency beacon had not been activated. The only things missing were the men themselves and a small length of rope from the stern. Data retrieved from the boat's GPS showed erratic movement after the last known position. The catamaran had drifted in looping circles, suggesting no one had been steering it for days. More curiously, the boat's log had been deleted, and the navigational software had been reset. Forensic analysis confirmed no signs of intrusion, struggle, or tampering. The sails appeared to have been left unfurled hastily, and one of them was damaged, perhaps during a squall, but nothing indicated a life-threatening storm. Speculation ran wild. Some believed one crew member fell overboard, and the others were lost trying to save him. But trained sailors wouldn't abandon ship without a radio call, especially with all safety equipment intact. Others suggested foul play from an unseen vessel or involvement in criminal activity, but nothing was stolen and no other boats had been logged in the area. Media dubbed it the Ghost Yacht. The case drew comparisons to the Mary Celeste. Authorities struggled to offer closure. Even in the age of GPS and satellite monitoring, 3 men had vanished under perfect weather conditions in a region heavily trafficked by marine vessels and aircraft. One detail still unsettles investigators. A video recorded just before departure shows the crew in high spirits, preparing for a smooth journey. Hours later, they were gone. No radio messages, no mayday, no clue. If the ocean can erase lives so quietly, what else has it swallowed unnoticed? The Kaz II now sits as one of the most chilling reminders that in the vastness of modern seas, even the present can vanish without a trace. The Carroll A. On January 31, 1921, the 5-masted schooner Carroll A. Deering was found run aground on the treacherous Diamond Shoals off the coast of North Carolina. The ship's sails were set, her galley showed signs of a recent meal, and the logbook was gone. Most chillingly, the entire crew had vanished. No lifeboats remained, no distress signals had been sent. The vessel stood silent, perfectly intact but lifeless, like a stage left behind after a final act, played in total secrecy. The Carroll A. Deering had departed from Rio de Janeiro in late 1920, carrying a load of coal bound for Norfolk, Virginia. The ship was captained by William Merritt, though due to illness, he had been replaced en route by Captain Willis Wormel, a seasoned mariner in his 60s. With a new crew and an uneventful voyage northward, nothing suggested trouble, until the ship was spotted days before grounding, behaving strangely. A lightship keeper noted that a crew member, not the captain, hailed them through a megaphone, reported issues with lost anchors, and requested the message be relayed. The ship then veered off course without ever contacting port again. When the Coast Guard reached the grounded vessel, they found eerie clues. The navigation equipment and logs were missing. The crew's personal belongings were untouched. Lifeboats had been launched, but there was no reason for evacuation. The cargo was still secured. No blood, no signs of a storm, no hull damage. The entire ship seemed paused mid-journey, like someone had stolen the ending. Federal investigations were launched. Suspicions range from piracy to mutiny to Bolshevik sabotage, this being the era of Red Scare hysteria. Some suggested the crew had staged a rebellion and fled. Yet, why abandon a seaworthy vessel? Why leave provisions, charts, and the chance of rescue? Adding to the strangeness, several other ships had vanished in the same region around that time. Rumors of a secret smuggling ring or even a mysterious weather phenomenon emerged. The Bermuda Triangle was not far away. No trace of the missing crew was ever found. Their names vanished from maritime records like ink soaked into deep water. One theory, quietly discussed, hinted at the possibility of government interference. Classified documents from the Department of Justice, once requested by historians, were missing pages relating to the case. The Carroll A Deering was eventually declared unsalvageable and scuttled. Her story, however, refused to sink. What made the Deering particularly haunting was not just the disappearance, but the precision of the event. Whoever left that ship did so calmly, deliberately, and without leaving a mark. It wasn't panic. It was something colder, more controlled. The ghost ship remains a maritime riddle, a textbook case of complete erasure in broad daylight. A final voyage lost not to storms or pirates, but to something even more obscure, a void of answers. The High Aim 6. On January 8, 2003, an Indonesian fishing vessel named High Aim 6 was found adrift in the Timor Sea, roughly 80 miles off the northern coast of Australia. Its engines were intact, the fuel tanks were full, the crew's clothes and personal items were still aboard. But the ship was completely deserted. Every member of the crew had vanished without a trace. Even more disturbing, the food stores were untouched, the lifeboats were still in place, and no emergency beacons had been activated. There was no distress signal, no signs of struggle, just silence. The High Aim 6 had departed from the port of Benoa, Bali, in December 2002, headed east with a full crew and a cargo of timber. Its final known radio transmission came shortly after departure. Weeks later, an Australian Coast Watch aircraft spotted the vessel drifting silently in remote waters. When officials boarded, they found no indication of an accident or mechanical failure. Everything appeared operational, except for the absence of human life. One chilling detail emerged during inspection. The ship's logbook had been removed, and some documents had been deliberately torn. Worse, several items in the captain's quarters had been violently disturbed. There were deep gouge marks on a cabin wall, and signs that someone had tried to destroy evidence. A single broken chair, overturned maps, and a snapped pencil on the navigation table hinted at some kind of confrontation, but nothing definitive. The investigation took a darker turn when one of the missing crew members' family members in Taiwan received a series of strange phone calls from a blocked number weeks after the disappearance. The voice was garbled, speaking in rapid Bahasa Indonesia. No trace of the calls could be followed. It was as if someone wanted to be heard, but not found. One crewman, the engineer, was eventually located alive in Indonesia and taken into custody. But his story only deepened the mystery. He claimed there had been a violent dispute at sea and that the rest of the crew had fled, yet no bodies were ever recovered. No credible motive was found. No criminal charges were brought. His statements contradicted known facts and were later deemed unreliable. Australian and Indonesian authorities quietly shelved the case, citing insufficient evidence. But internal memos leaked later suggested that naval intelligence had reviewed the case separately, probing the possibility of the vessel being hijacked for illegal transport, possibly human trafficking or weapons movement, only for the plan to be abandoned mid-sea. Some speculated that the crew had witnessed something they weren't supposed to. What remains most baffling is that the High Aim 6 was built to survive storms, equipped with emergency systems and helmed by experienced mariners. No alerts, no mechanical failure, no outside interference, at least none that left a mark. Just a working ship, floating in perfect silence. When the ocean hides a crime, it does so without sympathy. The High Aim 6 remains a modern ghost, its decks walked by no one, its story finished without a final chapter. The SV Bel Amica. In August 2006, the Italian Coast Guard received a report of an unmarked vessel drifting near the island of Sardinia. When authorities boarded the sleek sailing yacht, they were met with an unsettling sight. The ship, later identified as the SV Bel Amica, appeared to be in perfect condition. The engines were functional, a meal had been partially prepared in the galley, high-end maps and navigation tools were laid out. But the boat was empty. No captain, no crew, no explanation. Even more bizarre was the absence of any registration. The Bel Amica bore no official number, no country of origin, and no owner listed in any maritime database. It wasn't even equipped with the required emergency transponders. The only identifiers on board were luxury Italian food items, a French flag, and a stack of expensive clothing. Everything was neat, organized, as if someone had stepped away for a moment and never returned. Authorities found a few cryptic details. One was a list of Libyan ports with notes written in French. Another was a map marking specific shipping lanes through the Mediterranean, far from the yacht's drifting location. Tucked into a drawer was a strange piece of paper, coordinates, names, and what appeared to be coded entries. Italian media speculated the vessel might have been used for smuggling or secret transport missions, but there was no contraband on board, no weapons, no illegal cargo, just emptiness. A week later, a man from Luxembourg came forward, claiming to be the owner. He told authorities that the yacht had been left to drift due to a personal emergency that required him to disembark. He offered no specific details, no passenger manifest, no documentation to support the story. Despite the inconsistencies, the man was never charged and the investigation quietly ended. But maritime experts were troubled. The Bel Amica had been stocked for a long journey. Its equipment suggested it was built for stealth, not comfort. The complete lack of a digital footprint, combined with the sophisticated charts and food reserves, pointed to something more calculated. The boat had clearly been operating under the radar, literally and legally. Some investigators whispered that the yacht might have been involved in clandestine operations, intelligence gathering, covert delivery, or even elite smuggling. But no government agency acknowledged any link. No follow-up occurred. The boat was eventually auctioned off without fanfare. To this day, no one knows who had sailed the Bel Amica, why they abandoned it in international waters, or what its true mission had been. A vessel without a flag, a voyage without a destination, a vanishing act without a climax. What secrets were meant to stay hidden beneath those polished decks? What message lay encoded in the silence of an empty yacht? The Bel Amica remains a floating cipher, its meaning swallowed by waves. The Teignmouth Electron. In July 1969, the Teignmouth Electron was found adrift in the Atlantic Ocean, hundreds of miles from land. It was a compact trimaran, still afloat but eerily quiet. The sails flapped loosely in the wind. Charts and books were scattered inside the cabin, but no one was on board. The boat's sole occupant, British amateur sailor Donald Crowhurst, had vanished. No lifeboat was missing, no distress call had been sent. What investigators found inside the logbook would disturb even the most seasoned sailors. Crowhurst had entered the Sunday Times Golden Globe race in 1968, a solo, non-stop sailing competition around the world. Unlike his competitors, he had no long-distance sailing experience and his boat was rushed to completion, fraught with technical issues. Within weeks of departing, his equipment began to fail. Unwilling to face the humiliation of quitting or the financial ruin of losing sponsorship, Crowhurst began falsifying his position. He stayed adrift in the South Atlantic, reporting fake coordinates as if he were making record time around the world. But inside the cabin of the Teignmouth Electron, the truth unraveled. Crowhurst had kept two logs, one public and one private. The official version was a tale of progress. The private one descended into chaos. Pages revealed a slow psychological breakdown, detailing his existential thoughts, hallucinations, and a growing detachment from reality. He began referencing cosmic beings, time illusions, and mathematical codes. He wrote as if he were being observed, monitored, judged. Then the entries stopped abruptly. The final pages suggested a man on the edge of madness, convinced that he had discovered something profound, something the world was not ready to know. One of his last notes read, "It is finished. It is the Mercy." The implication was chilling. Crowhurst may have stepped off the boat willingly, surrendering to the sea. No body was ever recovered. No eyewitnesses, no final broadcast. Only his mind, preserved in ink. Analysts and psychiatrists have long debated the significance of his writings. Some call it a classic case of psychosis triggered by isolation and fear. Others argue he may have encountered something he believed to be real, an unknown force or idea that shattered his understanding of the world. The boat was salvaged and later put on display as a maritime artifact. Its interior remains preserved, a haunting time capsule of a mind unraveling in solitude. The Teignmouth Electron wasn't just a ship. It was a stage for one man's private confrontation with fear, failure, and something perhaps beyond comprehension. Whether Crowhurst was a fraud, a philosopher, or a casualty of something darker remains unanswered. The ocean does not always need monsters to take a man. Sometimes it only needs silence. The Jian Seng. In March 2006, Australian authorities discovered a large, rusted tanker drifting aimlessly near the Gulf of Carpentaria in northern Queensland. The vessel bore no name, no identifying marks, and no country of origin. It was later unofficially labeled the Jian Seng, though that name, like everything else about the ship, remains unverified. What was most disturbing wasn't just the ship's condition. It was the fact that no one could determine who owned it, where it came from, or why it had been left behind without a single soul on board. When officials boarded the vessel, they were met with a ghostly stillness. The Jian Seng had no crew, no cargo, and no registration documents. Its engines were inoperative, and its navigational systems had been either stripped or destroyed. There were large quantities of rice and empty water bottles in the galley, suggesting it had once supported a sizable crew. But the beds were cold, and personal belongings had been removed. The ship seemed to have been abandoned deliberately. One of the most unsettling discoveries was the complete absence of any identifying instruments. No AIS transponder, no distress beacons, and no radio logs. This was highly unusual for a vessel of that size. Typically, tankers carry digital footprints that make their journeys traceable, but the Jian Seng was a blank slate. The ship was also curiously well maintained in some areas. Certain storage compartments were recently restocked, while others had been hastily emptied. Electrical wiring had been cut in key control panels, possibly to ensure the ship could not transmit signals. It was as if someone wanted the Jian Seng to vanish, but not before making sure it couldn't speak. Initial speculation suggested the vessel had been used in smuggling operations, perhaps for drugs, weapons, or people. Others suspected it had served as a refueling station for illegal fishing fleets. But none of these theories accounted for the complete erasure of identity. Satellite records showed no matching departure from any nearby port. No missing ship reports were filed in neighboring countries. The Jian Seng simply appeared. The Australian government, perhaps wary of political entanglement, towed the ship out to deeper waters and scuttled it. No official explanation was ever provided. Requests for information through maritime transparency channels returned no results. What makes the Jian Seng so disturbing is not just that it was abandoned, but that it was designed to disappear. Its silence was engineered. Every trace of who, what, or why was meticulously wiped. It was a maritime ghost not born of tragedy, but of intent. In an age of satellite surveillance, digital manifests, and international tracking, the Jian Seng is a black hole. A vessel that moved in shadow, completed its purpose, and was then erased like a signature in wet ink. Some ships get lost. Others are meant to be forgotten. The MV Ocean Wave. In March 2013, Canadian authorities were alerted to a ghostly fishing vessel washing up on the shores of British Columbia. It was the MV Ocean Wave, a small tuna trawler last seen over 2 years earlier off the coast of Japan. The boat had been presumed destroyed during the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and subsequent tsunami, which had devastated vast regions of Japan's eastern coastline. Yet here it was, thousands of miles away, intact, eerily silent, and completely deserted. No one was aboard. There were no signs of distress, no evidence of mechanical failure, and no explanation for how the vessel had survived a trans-Pacific drift in open ocean. The hull was battered but stable. Fishing gear remained on deck, tangled but undisturbed. The wheelhouse was stripped of electronics, and the logbook had long since been soaked beyond recovery. Whatever had happened to the crew occurred long before the boat reached North America. Japanese authorities confirmed that the ocean wave had been moored in a harbor directly in the path of the 2011 tsunami. It was presumed destroyed, along with thousands of other ships, but the vessel's reappearance raised new questions. If the tsunami had swept the boat out to sea, why was there no debris trail? Why did the GPS logs, when recovered from the boat's backup system, show a bizarre drifting pattern that stopped transmitting midway across the Pacific? Marine trackers were startled to find the boat had remained off the radar for nearly the entire journey. Even as it passed through monitored shipping lanes and satellite-covered regions, no one had spotted it. No vessel had logged a sighting. It was as if the ocean wave had traveled the entire Pacific under a cloak. There were no reports of bodies or life rafts. None of the missing crew members had been located. Their families had long since buried empty coffins. Now, they were asked to reconsider everything they had believed about the final moments of that voyage. Investigators explored the possibility that the vessel had been salvaged mid-ocean and then released. Some suggested illegal scavengers had stripped it, but nothing of value had been taken. Others theorized that the boat had been used for smuggling during its journey and then set adrift again when its purpose was fulfilled. But the strangest detail came from the Canadian response team. One crew member swore the cabin door had been latched shut from the inside, a mechanical lock that required a human hand to engage. Yet no one was inside. Was the ocean wave a relic of natural disaster, or had it served a second, undocumented mission across the ocean? A forgotten trawler lost in tragedy, or a courier for secrets no one would admit to. Whatever the truth, the ocean wave became a spectral artifact of two continents. A ghost ship whose journey outlasted its crew. A reminder that even in an era of total surveillance, some vessels can still vanish and return without leaving a footprint. The Resolven. In August 1884, a British merchant vessel named Resolven was found adrift in the North Atlantic, near the coast of Newfoundland. The sea was calm, the weather fair. The ship showed no signs of distress. Her sails were trimmed, the cargo of lumber intact, and the galley bore evidence of a meal interrupted. But the entire crew, captain, officers, and sailors, were missing. No bodies were found. The ship's lifeboat was gone, but nothing else suggested why anyone would have left a fully functional vessel in such perfect conditions. The Resolven had left a port in Nova Scotia just days earlier, heading toward the Bay of Islands in Newfoundland. It was a short, familiar route. The ship was relatively new and captained by experienced seamen, but when she was discovered by the crew of the HMS Mallard, there was no one aboard. Clocks had stopped. The logbook had not been updated since the previous day. The captain's cabin was undisturbed, and valuables remained untouched. One crew member's pipe was still resting beside a half-filled cup of tea. There was no indication of a storm or collision. The ship's hull was intact. Rigging had not been damaged. The bilge was dry. The only clue was the missing lifeboat, though sea conditions made an emergency evacuation unnecessary. If the crew had left voluntarily, they had done so in clear weather, abandoning their cargo, pay, and safety for no discernible reason. Initial theories ranged from fire in the hold, though no scorch marks were found, to fear of sinking due to a sudden hull breach, which was never confirmed. Some proposed the crew mistook a minor issue as fatal and fled prematurely. But none of these explanations accounted for the total disappearance of every soul aboard. No bodies ever washed ashore. No distress call was heard. Strangely, the area around Newfoundland had been the site of multiple ghost ship reports during the 19th century, leading some maritime historians to speculate about magnetic anomalies or disorientation caused by deep fog and shifting currents. Others pointed to the superstitions of the time, noting that sailors often whispered about hungry seas that swallowed crews whole, leaving behind nothing but the hull. What disturbed naval officers the most was the familiarity of the route. The Resolven had not entered uncharted waters or faced any known hazard zones. She had simply stopped being a manned vessel in the middle of a calm voyage. No formal inquiry ever produced a conclusion. The ship was towed into harbor, inspected, and quietly sold. But her reputation lingered. Sailors refused to work aboard her, claiming she had emptied herself. Later, owners repainted and renamed her, but whispers followed every journey. The story of the Resolven stands not only as an early ghost ship mystery, but as a reminder that even in waters mapped and sailed for centuries, human presence is never guaranteed. A vessel can be sound, the sky can be clear, and yet a journey can still end in disappearance. The sea, when it chooses, leaves nothing behind but wood and silence. Conclusion. These 10 maritime vanishings are not isolated freak incidents scattered across time and geography. They form a chilling pattern, one where the sea does not merely swallow ships, but deliberately erases their occupants while leaving their vessels behind like hollow signatures. From the frigid Atlantic to the sun-scorched Pacific, from wooden schooners of the 19th century to GPS-equipped catamarans in the 21st, crews have vanished with clinical precision, often in calm weather, aboard seaworthy ships, without a cry for help. This is not just a pattern of accidents. It is a pattern of disappearance engineered without explanation. In each case, someone, or something, interrupted a routine voyage, not to steal, not to destroy, but to remove, to subtract the human element so cleanly that it left behind no blood, no clues, no logic, just operational silence. And yet, when these disappearances are reviewed officially, they are dismissed quietly. Government reports are archived with inconclusive language. Distress signals that never came are excused by equipment failure. Classified assessments vanish. In the case of the Jian Seng, the ship was deliberately scuttled without public investigation. With the Teignmouth Electron, the personal journals pointing to a mental break were sealed. The pattern repeats not just on the ocean, but in the institutions that surround it. This suggests a systemic suppression of deeper truths. Whether rooted in maritime law, intelligence operations, or something more unspoken, the response has been consistently evasive. Every time the ocean returns an empty ship, authorities quietly clean up the mystery, remove it from the press cycle, and write the final report in passive voice. And so, we are left with more than unanswered questions. We are left with lost possibilities. In each case, what vanished was not just human life, but testimony. If someone had witnessed something extraordinary, an atmospheric anomaly, a foreign experiment, a non-human contact, it died with them. The last word in every case was silence. And that silence has cost us more than closure. It has cost us understanding. Perhaps that is the real danger these cases reveal. Not the ocean's capacity to take, but our civilization's eagerness to look away, to sanitize the impossible, to erase the uncomfortable. If even one of these ships had been given full transparency, what might we have learned about our world, or about what moves beneath its surface? And so, the cycle continues. The next ship sets sail. The next logbook is filled. Somewhere out on the horizon, a vessel will stop responding, and someone will prepare another vague press release. Because the question isn't whether these disappearances happened, it's why they were allowed to stay unexplained.